Let's go ahead. It is the top of the hour. Let's go ahead and get started. Want to be respectful to everyone's time. I know we have a lot to cover, and there's likely to be a lot of questions and comments. Hello, everybody. My name is Sophie Ziegler. I'm the events coordinator here at Library Juice, and I'm very excited to be here. I'm excited that you are here to celebrate this new title. This is part two of our book launch. Part one is already up on the website as a recording, so I encourage you to take a look at that. I'm excited to pass it over to everyone who's got a lot of really important things to say. But first, I'll just say a little bit about Library Juice and what it is that we're up to. Library Juice has three main arms, the first of which is Library Juice Academy, which is professional development for all of us in the information sciences and information studies fields. We've got courses, they're online, asynchronous. Most of them are 4 weeks, some are 6 weeks. They're on a wide variety of topics, all subfields of our profession, all the things that we didn't quite learn in library school, all the things that we decide that we need to know now, even though we didn't need to know before, all the things that we're just curious about because they're emerging qualities. We've got a la carte courses where you can just pick and choose what you'd like. We also have certificates and other guided ways to move through specific topics and show mastery and to show how much you've taken. You can learn more about all of that at libraryjuiceacademy.com. We also have Library Juice Press, which is our publishing arm. So we publish books and articles, usually on critical angles of LIS writ large. So librarianship, archives, everything that has to do with that, the full spectrum of information professionals. And Library Juice Press, of course, is the publisher for the title that we're celebrating today. We also have a really strong backlog, a lot of great new titles coming out all the time. Library Juice is an imprint of Litwin Books, so you can learn more about us at litwinbooks.com. And then finally, we have Library Juice Connections, which what brings us all here today. This is our arm in which we're trying to think about how it is to bring people together to discuss the most important things about our profession these days, what it means to be a librarian, what it means to be an information worker, and really be sure that we are able to learn from each other, able to share ideas. We work with Library Juice Press for the types of book launches like we're here for today. We also work with Library Juice Academy to have presenters talk about the courses that they teach. And then we also do one-off topics of interest to the community. We're always happy to hear what you would like us to have a webinar, a panel, or an event on. So you can find out more about us at Library Juice Connections. You can also find out how to connect with us to talk about a topic that you would like to spearhead in an event that we can build together. So we have a lot going on. I hope you'll reach out and learn more about us. If you don't know that much yet, well, it's a lot of fun. We do a lot of things. But for now, I'm extremely happy to turn it over to Mary, to who will be running today's show. Mary, it is all yours.
Okay, hi. I'm Mary Onorato, and together with my friend Nora Murad, we are co-editors of the book we'll be discussing today, Resisting Erasure, Libraries in Palestine and Palestine in Libraries. I'd like to start by thanking Library Juice Press for publishing the book and hosting this webinar, and also our sponsors, Just World Educational, Librarians and Archivists with Palestine, and the Social Responsibilities Roundtable of the American Library Association. I also want to acknowledge that I'm speaking today from the ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples. I am grateful for their long stewardship of the land and waters of this area, and I recognize their long and continuing physical and spiritual connection to the land. And let me also just reflect for a moment on the irony that as we even somewhat obliquely recognize a past genocide, we are about to discuss efforts to quash discussion of a current genocide. In any event, in a moment, Nora and I will introduce ourselves, but let me just share our plan for the day or the next hour. So we will introduce ourselves. There will be an overview of the book, and then Nora is going to talk a bit about the genesis of the book. We have our four panelists today are contributors to the book. They have very interesting things to say. And I will just mention they are four different panelists than the ones that were in part one. This is a different presentation once we get through about the first 20 minutes. And then there will be a Q&A. Now, the book is in two parts, as the title suggests. The first part talks about libraries in Palestine, the long history of libraries in Palestine, which many people may be surprised by, and also a continuing and persistent, right from 1948, Israeli policy of destroying or taking over library buildings, of confiscating the contents, whether they are books or historical documents, even from private collections in people's homes during various phases of occupation. And of course, the reason for doing this is that it helps enable them to try to control the narrative about the history of Palestine and about Palestinian identity, and to either erase or hide documentary evidence as well as books of the long Palestinian presence in the area. We also hear about the emotional and psychological impact of this constant cycle of destruction and confiscation, and also the logistical issues of trying to obtain books. It's worth mentioning that the Palestinians in both the West Bank and in Gaza, at least prior to 2023, and we don't know what it is now, but had some of the highest literacy rates in the world. It's worth mentioning that these areas that are under occupation, that often struggle just to get the basics of life, put such a high priority on education and literacy. So it's very important to Palestinians to have access to books, to have access to information, and of course to preserve the historical artifacts and documentation. And so there's a great deal about that, and then also about how Palestinians continue to work by all sorts of means to regain control of these materials, to rebuild libraries, to build new libraries, and some information, some, yes, reflections on how that is in itself a kind of resistance to erasure and occupation. Now, part two is Palestine in libraries, where we talk about how pervasive in all aspects of library work censorship of information about Palestinian and Palestinian voices has become. And this has been true for a very long time. So there's a lot of evidence of that. There's discussion of the various forms that takes and of the various ways that librarians have tried to push back on this and to resist, including some very good resources for doing that. But it also talks about the various impacts of this systemic censorship. First of all, on librarians who are continually being harassed, that their jobs are threatened, their professional reputations are threatened. Often they are accused of spuriously of being anti-Semitic when all they are trying to do is their job and to live up to their ethical responsibilities. And sometimes even feel threatened in their homes, which is horrific. And I will acknowledge here, this is not, in fact, it's important to acknowledge, this is not unique to the question of Palestine. I just read yesterday of a public librarian director who was fired because she refused to move the LGBTQ books in her children's and YA section into the adult section of the library. So the tactics that we're talking about, they're part of a playbook that is used by authoritarian regimes and by powerful groups and interest groups to try to quash discussion of just about anything. But of course, here we're talking specifically about how this is happening with relation to Palestine. In addition to librarians, this also has an impact, for instance, on authors and other people. First, authors in terms of it's hard enough to get books about Palestine or by Palestinians into libraries, but then even to get them into display cases, to get authors in to talk about them or about other subjects or other experts to talk. And in addition, authors, will hear about that today, authors who have no direct connection to Palestine are finding themselves being canceled and censored because of various things that they've said on social media that just support the right of Palestinians to live. So we'll be hearing about that. So again, thinking about it, there's also an impact on library patrons. So of course, obviously, Palestinian American library patrons who do not feel welcome in what is supposed to be a public space and often is a community center for their communities. And think especially about Palestinian American children who then are deprived from learning about their heritage and seeing their experience mirrored in literature, and also the public at large. You know, we talk about children's literature being about mirrors and windows. So yes, Palestinian children are not seeing their experiences mirrored, but other children are not getting that window into the experience of Palestinian children, and adults are not getting the information that they need in order to make decisions about what they want to say about to the representatives about American foreign policy. So this is a very broad problem with a lot of ramifications. And then in addition to that, this whole system of censoring Palestinian voices and censoring information about Palestinians helps to, again, we're talking about controlling the narrative, helps to dehumanize Palestinians and to make it easier to carry out the policies that we are seeing in Palestine today. And I will say that we also see that happening with other groups in the region. Just yesterday, President Trump saying that we're going to bomb them back to the Stone Age where they belong. If there's anybody who doesn't belong in the Stone Age, it's the Iranians. They've been out of the Stone Age longer than anybody. Yeah. Anyway, okay, I think that's, yes, and we talk about the various ways of resisting. Oh, I also do want to mention, was very sad. There was an excellent chapter, it was all ready to go, about the work that an organization has been doing actually to make it easier for libraries to find children's books that are by or about Palestinians. And it was withdrawn really at the last minute, just before we went to press, because people in the organization were concerned about possible repercussions for their volunteer staff. It's just within the experience of creating the book, here is a case of censorship and the impact that it has on the access to information. Let me just move along here. Okay. Let me just stop for a minute so Nora and I can both introduce ourselves a little more thoroughly. So obviously, you know my name already. My background is in editorial work and also in library reference publishing. And I lived in the Middle East for several years, and I have a very personal connection to the region.
The genesis of this book, Resisting Erasure, Libraries in Palestine and Palestine in Libraries, lies in a study I did previously about erasure in Palestinian children's books, which was in cooperation with 4 wonderful Palestinian teachers. Out of about 123 books that we identified, we deeply analyzed 56 of them and found the main theme in these books was erasure. And then we dug deeper to identify the categories of erasure, and within each category, nuances of erasure. I will share some of that with you in a minute, but first let me show you how this research ended up in peer-reviewed journals, especially for librarians, because the whole idea of this was inspired by the wonderful mentor librarian Debbie Reese. And it's really important for librarians who recommend books to kids to understand how they and the children readers can read critically. So there were several articles that came out of this, and I will share some of them with you now, and you can look online. The first article that I published is Erasure of Palestinians in English Language Children's Books. This was in the ALA's Young Adult Library Services. And also, I published in Public Library Quarterly, Why is it so difficult to find Palestinian children's books? In School Library Journal, Censorship of Palestinians is so normal, even anti-racists don't see it. And Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting published this article about the book Welcome to Israel with Sesame Street, called Erasure of Palestinians Begins in Preschool, with Sesame Street's endorsement. So what's the content of these articles? I'll share briefly, but hope you go to read them as Library Juice Press read them, became interested, and then asked for this anthology. As I said, there were 4 categories of erasure that we found: omission, dehumanization, distortion, and disinformation. And within each category, there were multiple what we called nuances. So for example, an example of omission is showing Palestinian areas, but omitting the Palestinians from those areas. So as you see in this book, Israel ABCs, the page is about Via Dolorosa, a very important street smack in the middle of the Palestinian Old City in East Jerusalem. It's a commercial center, it's a residential center, it's a tourist center, it's a religious center. But in this book, you see the place, but you don't see any Palestinians in the Palestinian place. Another example of omission comes from the Sesame Street book, and this shows you how difficult it can be to see erasure because it's not there. This book has a puppet that represents an Israeli child, a puppet that represents a Palestinian child, and it alternates one puppet and the other puppet, giving you a feeling of balance, of inclusion, of respect, and of getting along. But if you look more carefully, you'll see that Palestinians in this book are only represented as religious, linguistic, or cultural minorities of Israel, and never as a national group in its own right with its own national history. And that is a form of omission because the identity of Palestinians is being erased. And so to erase it in a book like Welcome to Israel with Sesame Street conveys certain problematic messages to readers. Another category is dehumanization. There are several nuances, but this one I find particularly egregious. Sharing Our Homeland was published by Lee and Low, one of the preeminent diversity children's publishers. And in the little paragraph, which I won't read for you now, it describes how an Israeli child is victimized by violence and a Palestinian child is victimized by violence. Again, giving the impression of inclusion and balance. But both these children in this book were victimized by violence by Palestinians. And so Israel as a perpetrator is completely invisible. And Palestinians become dehumanized because they're further presented in their stereotype as violent, among other things. Here's an example of distortion. Adventure Girl, Dabby Digs in Israel, is one of those cool STEM books for girls. A girl with a girl mentor archaeologist is learning about archaeology, and it's so cool and it's so upbeat, but wait a second. The archaeologist in this book is an Israeli archaeologist that's part of the ministry that oversees archaeology. And that ministry, like a lot of ministries in Israel, is very anti-Palestinian. More specifically, the field of archaeology is used in Israel to displace Palestinians from their land. Israel will declare a certain area an archaeological dig, displace the Palestinians, and either claim that area for itself or ultimately a settlement will get built on it. And that whole experience that Palestinians have with archaeology is erased from this book, leaving a distorted understanding of what's actually happening in Israel. And in terms of disinformation, these two are examples of many books that are about Israel and have the Dome of the Rock on the cover. The Dome of the Rock, this golden dome, is one of the most important and iconic mosques in Islam and certainly in Palestine, but it's not in Israel. It's in East Jerusalem, which was illegally annexed by Israel after 1967, and until Donald Trump was not recognized by any single government in the world as being part of Israel. So to put the Dome of the Rock on the cover of a book with Israel in the title is not only disinformation, because it's not true. This is not part of Israel. But more importantly, it's part of an intentional narrative that for Israel to claim all of Jerusalem as its own and to erase Palestinians from Jerusalem and other parts of Palestine. So it's important that librarians and caregivers who choose books, buy books, as well as the children readers themselves, learn to read critically, because these problematic messages are out there. But they're not the only thing out there. As you'll see from another article that I wrote from the study I mentioned, an anti-racist, anti-colonial approach to evaluating Palestinian children's books, is an article from Journal of Literacy Innovations, which uses also texts and covers to show what are the positive, the anti-racist, the anti-colonial messages that we're looking for in Palestinian children's books. And it gives the other side, if you will, not only what you should be wary of and be critical of, not censor, but be critical of, but you can also look for self-representation, you can look for complexity. There's a lot of wonderful books out there as well, and more are coming. So I wanted to share this with you because this study and this concept of erasure is so important to the Palestinian narrative right now, as Palestinians are literally being erased from the earth in Gaza and in the West Bank, displaced. We see a parallel in literature to erase the humanity of Palestinians, and it starts with children, and that's something we want to be super concerned about. So back to you, Mary.
Each of our contributors who are here with us are going to briefly introduce themselves. We're going to start with Iman.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Iman Al-Khadra Ansari. I'm Al-Khadra from Safad, and my husband is Ansari from Jerusalem. I'll tell you a little bit about myself, and I'll try to stick into my timeline. I was born and raised to a Palestinian who was born in Safad, and to another Safadi Palestinian who was born in Haifa. And I grew up in Saudi Arabia as one of 5 children. My memories about our upbringing is something that contributed to the story that I shared in that book. In Saudi Arabia, Palestinians are hardworking, excelling at school, excelling at every job. I grew up being very proud being a Palestinian, and I transmitted that pride to my children. Even though I've been living in the US for 29 years, I had no reason to think otherwise. Part of my upbringing was growing up to a father who was a pharmacist, continued on to become a clinical pathologist, and a mother who started pharmacy school but couldn't finish it because she moved to Saudi Arabia, where there's no pharmacy school for women. But both of them were immensely invested in education, and beside education, in the world and in getting to know about the world. So they're both reading, they're reading to us while we're in the womb, they're reading to us afterwards. The gifts that would come to us from family and friends have always been books. Books mattered a great deal to us. Over the past couple of years, however, one of my shocks, and I'm 52 years old, so I'm not really a youngster, was to realize that the perception of who's Palestinian is not exactly the same in my community and in my surrounding here in Newton, Massachusetts, to my perception of who we are. I'm not a writer. And one of the gifts that Mary and Nora gave me was to have this opportunity of writing my story, because I felt that in the absence of my voice, I'm leaving that false narrative of who we are to stand. So it was a great experience writing the story, even though it was a painful story. And I welcome your questions later on. I still tell my kids Palestinians are not better than other people, but no less than other people, and they need to work hard and prove themselves. We need to share our stories, and we need to basically have the permission to narrate. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iman.
Oh, and I didn't share the pictures
Oh,
very
why don't
quickly.
you do that very quick? You want to do that very quickly? Yes.
I'm gonna do that very
Oh
quickly.
my gosh.
So let me see where I can do the. Okay. So anyway, so these are my parents in Saudi Arabia, in Jeddah, my mom, my dad, and that's me as a child. This is more recently with my mother, and this is me with my father. This is my father's office. That's not his library. That's just his office. And I don't know what vision people have about a Palestinian father's office. This is his office at our home, and this is just a few of his books. This is a photo that my daughter sent me a few months ago of my father in front of our house. He was reading, but what she intended to send was in a text. She sent me the picture of all these birds, and I told her, "Is Jiddo feeding them?" And she said, "No, he was reading." And that's me and my dad discussing books. That's my kids in Safad, my hometown, the first time we were able to see it. And that's the last time we were able to see it together in 2023. And everyone reads. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Iman. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much for sharing that. Jamila, you want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you for having me here. I'm Jamila Tompkins Bigelow, a children's book author. If you are interested in children's books about Black Muslim kids doing all kinds of things in Philadelphia, you can find them at my website, jamilathewriter.com, to find out more. But the chapter that I wrote was actually a conversation. So it's co-authored between myself and Hannah Marmelstein. And the chapter is our conversation about my author banning, me being banned. So as a school librarian at Germantown Friends School, I was invited as an author. I was invited to Germantown Friends School by Hannah and other librarians there to do school events. I do that quite often. I go to schools, I do programs, I read to the kids. And this invitation was extended for late October 2023. And it seemed like it was going well. And then a few days before, I was called in for a meeting, told that we were going to postpone it for my protection. And our chapter is called Who's Being Protected, right? Because we were asking that question, right, with these things. I didn't really know exactly why it needed to be postponed. There were all these vague, again, explanations of, for my protection, they felt that we were in a period of time where it would be better for us to wait till the spring or something like that to get this event, to have our event. And just kept being postponed. I kept asking questions. When is the date? When is the date? I want to put a date on the calendar. And what I didn't know was happening behind the scenes was that there was a parent group that had formed and decided that I was dangerous for the students. And I was dangerous for the students because I had liked some social media posts that were pro-Palestinian. I had shared posts about giving aid, here's where you can donate. Possibly, I participated in a Palestinian writing festival where I read a children's book. I had no children's books at the time about Palestinian children, about Palestine. I had no direct relationship to Palestine. I was not going to discuss Palestine during this visit. That was never a part of the plan. But I think that the banning, which eventually I found out at the end, like it was being completely canceled because of this parent group, it happened. It really was an example of all of the different bannings that have been happening to authors. If you express even a whisper of support for Palestinians, you can be banned from just being in community with students. And it was very shocking and very painful for me because this is actually a school in my community. I can literally walk past it. I drive past it all of the time. And it felt like I'm not allowed in this space at all, even their public library, because I am banned because of just liking and speaking out on a very basic human level. But you can find out a lot about how many Zionist groups have come down hard on Black educators, on educators in general, on authors, anyone who speaks out about Palestine. Around the United States, all of the different kinds of bans that authors are experiencing just on the basis of, we saw that you said this, we saw that you posted, we saw that you liked this thing, that essentially is saying something like, that may be just sharing like an example of the brutalization of Palestinians, not even giving an opinion about it, just sharing it. And that makes you dangerous for students. So we asked the question, who's being protected, because we did not feel protected in that moment. And I feel like a lot of students are not being protected in Philadelphia schools because of these kinds of author bans.
Thank you, Jamila. Leslie, you want to go ahead?
Sure. Welcome, everybody. My name is Leslie Williams, and Jamila's story resonates with me very powerfully because in 2014, when there was another case of Israel attacking and bombing Gaza, I was a librarian at my hometown library in Evanston, Illinois, and I had been a librarian at that library for almost 30 years. And a community group had wanted to invite Ali Abu Nima, who is the founder of the Electronic Intifada and has two wonderful books, The Battle for Justice in Palestine and One Country. So he was booked to discuss that at our library. And very similar to Jamila's experience, suddenly people were saying, maybe we need to postpone, maybe this isn't the right time, feelings are running high. And I've discovered that this is a very common tactic in censoring Palestinian speech, particularly in libraries and on campuses. And really, since that event, we did eventually have that event because the author publicized the censorship that he was experiencing. And as a result of that, eventually I had to leave the Evanston Public Library, and I have not worked as a librarian officially since then. So this is something that I'm extremely familiar with. And it really, really shook my faith in public libraries, frankly, because the reason I had wanted to be a librarian was because I believed so strongly in the idea of the American Public Library as an institution that protected free speech, that encouraged unpopular and controversial opinions to be aired in the library and to be shared. And it was really pretty shocking how the library ecosystem really not just failed me, but failed people like Jamila and is failing Palestinians and anyone who wants to know about Palestine. So in my chapter, I go through basically the library ecosystem at the different stages at which it becomes very difficult for Palestinians to publish. And I would tell you, I spent a lot of time working on this chapter, talking to Palestinian authors, talking to Hannah and Michael Mushabek, who run Interlink Press, which is a Palestinian publisher. And Hannah has written a children's book, which has also frequently been banned and challenged at various libraries. And one of the things that I got is that Palestinians just assume they have to self-publish. They just assume that publishers are not going to pick up their books, that libraries and bookstores are not going to pick up their books. And to a very large extent, that continues to be true. And you'll notice that a lot of the children's books that are promoted are self-published, or at least were originally self-published. Then there's the whole issue of how they're cataloged. Does cataloging actually recognize Palestine as a separate entity? Or do the books just get lumped in with books from the Middle East or Muslim books? And then do they get reviewed? So one of the authors that I worked with, Amanda Najib, who has this absolutely fantastic book called Lana Makes Purple Pizza, which is about a little Palestinian American girl cooking with her mother. She self-published that. It was mostly promoted by people on TikTok. She sold 4,000 copies before it was officially published. And yet, all of the major review sources did not cover it until later. And many of the books that have been promoted in the Palestine Book Awards, which is a London-based organization that promotes hundreds and hundreds of Palestinian books every year. In 2024, their Palestinian Book Award winners, only 6% of them were reviewed in any of the standard review sources that librarians use, and none of the 6 that won were reviewed. And Amanda's book, despite winning the Palestinian Book Award and all of this attention online, There are only 45 copies of it in WorldCat. I checked today, only 45 copies. And that is truly shocking and disappointing. My chapter is basically about the difficulty that Palestinian authors face in getting their books reviewed and in libraries and bookstores. And I have a lot of suggestions about how librarians can help turn this around by prioritizing Palestinian books, by being proactive in seeking them out, being proactive in mentoring Palestinian authors onto how to get reviewed, how to get an ISBN, how to get your books in bookstores and libraries, and also how to fight the urge to self-censor and to comply in advance. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Leslie. Abid, would you like to go ahead?
Yes, thank you. And hello, everybody. What an amazing opportunity. So I am Abdel Fattah Basrour, born in a refugee camp called Aida to two survivors of the Nakba in 1948. I am the 14th child in the family, the youngest, but one of the four alive. The 10 who passed away during my parents' life, who also were hoping to be buried in their hometown, Beit Natif, but unfortunately, they passed away in 2003, 2006 in the cemetery of the camp. And talking about this Nakba, a lot of people think that this was the end, that we recall the destruction of homes, uprooting of families, exile of hundreds of thousands. But there is this other Nakba, quieter yet equally devastating, the Nakba of memory, the Nakba of culture. In 1948, Palestinian families who were forced out of their homes or fled by fear the Israelis did not seize only the land. They entered houses, schools, libraries. They took with them tens of thousands of books in different fields. And these were not just abandoned relics. They were the living libraries of people, scholars. And so systematic theft of Palestinian intellectual life absorbed into Israeli institutions like the Hebrew University and the National Library. So imagine the violence of that act, to strip a people not only of their homes, but of their words, their stories, their articles, to erase the record of their existence and replace it with silence. This was not incidental, it was a deliberate, and it is a cultural erasure. So it did not end in 1948. Look at what happened in 1967. Archives were looted again. In 1983, during the invasion of Lebanon, of Beirut, Palestinian research centers were ransacked. The archives were stolen. Their collections shipped to Israel. In 2002, the Ministry of Culture in Ramallah was raided. Its six-story building and archives destroyed. Even today, archaeological sites in the West Bank are demolished, artifacts funneled into Israeli museums and markets. And what happens in Gaza during these different aggressions and so on? The United Nations has called the destruction of cultural heritage in Gaza a war crime. More than half of Gaza's cultural sites have been obliterated. Libraries, theaters, archives, museums, even holy sites reduced to rubble. This is, again, not collateral damage. It is a strategy to erase Palestinian memory, to deny Palestinian identity, to commit what would be called a cultural genocide. Books are more than papers. They are vessels of identity, of continuity, of dignity. To steal them is to attempt to steal a people's soul. Yet, despite this theft, Palestinians continue to write, to preserve, to remember. Our culture survives because memory cannot be fully erased. And are famous as Arabs in general for oral history. And we need to commit much more as well to written history. So today, let us name this crime clearly. The theft of Palestinian books and archives is part of this ongoing Nakba. It is an attempt to continue to erase us from history. And of course, they try to remove us from geography as well. And our response must be to protect, to document, to tell our stories loud and clear, louder than ever. Because as long as we speak, as long as we write, as long as we remember, Palestinian lives. And as long as we have people like you who continue to remember, who continue to provoke, who continue to put us in libraries and in museums and in fields and in the media, they will never succeed. My chapter is a small play. It's not like a common academic paper. So hopefully you will enjoy reading it, because I believe when I established Ar-Ruwad in 1998 as a cultural center, library was heart of it, because I believe libraries should not be cemeteries of books, but a lively space which give an opportunity for children and young people to dream, to imagine, to create, and not just be stuck with these banal things that people try to dictate them what to do and what to think. So thank you for this opportunity, and value hugely the work of Mary and Nora and all our co-writers. Thank you.
Thank you, Abid, very much.
Thank you. I'd like to pose a question to each of you if we have time. It means each person should be brief, because we're going to end at the top of the hour. Iman, you talked about your family and the importance of books in your family. I wanted to ask you about your book chapter, which is, as I recall, called Home Lost Sanctuary. And your chapter brings together the two parts of our book, which is the destruction and erasure in Palestine and the erasure in the United States, because you experienced a horrific event of censorship at a library, at your public library, and you wrote about it. You wrote about it as a patron, which is such an important voice.
Thank you, Nora, for this question. I'm going to say that you will see from my chapter, libraries are my home, wherever they are. I love libraries. And just sitting in them, the quiet, the fact that I'm surrounded by all these smart people who gave their best. Like whenever people write a book, they're giving their absolute best. So I'm getting the finest ideas, consuming them into my senses, into my body, and feeling peace as I keep growing my knowledge, refining my knowledge, and all of that. And I'd use them not only to know about the world, but also to learn medicine, to study for my boards. I remember being pregnant and going to the library and reading these books and answering questions before my board exam. I associate libraries with my entire journey as a human being, as a child, as an adult, as a physician, and as a neighbor in Newton. For the librarian, the fact that returning books, because all my kids read voraciously and I can't keep up with their appetite by buying all these books. So we always borrow books. Returning the books to the library right now in Newton became an emotional event for me, because even driving in that street, and I'm an intensive care unit physician, so I'm not someone who is like a shaking violet or easy to scare. Just passing through that street, my heart rate goes up. I start sweating. I'm finding it hard to continue to focus on the road, and I need to stop on the side. That for me is panic. That's a panic attack. And it's a panic attack for passing by a library that a few months ago was a place where I find peace. And that is not a good thing. And I think for the librarians of that library, or for librarians in other libraries, you want the library to always be welcoming. You want people to always come and find that they belong in the library by having books about them, by having people who welcome them. If people look like them, that's even better. But in order to make that library It should be a place, a refuge for everyone who's seeking knowledge, not for one people, but not the others. I hope that answers your question, Nora.
So here's a question for Leslie. I'm a retired school librarian who has been censored repeatedly by other school librarians on the topic of censorship erasure of Palestine. Some of them will reach out to me privately to say they agree, but they won't take stands. How do we push back?
People have to grow balls. That's the only way I can say it. As we have seen, not just with the issue of Palestine, but certainly under the current presidential administration, there is a tendency to try and hunker down, to try and comply in advance, and to think that's going to keep you safe. And we have seen that is not working. It is not going to keep you safe. I was really moved by what Iman had to say, because I've seen that in a lot of libraries, that people who would be natural allies to libraries are feeling disrespected, unwelcomed, that they're being stereotyped as enemies of the United States. And there's absolutely no excuse for libraries, and particularly school libraries, to do that. I've also noticed that the School Library Association meetings often welcome, for example, the Anti-Defamation League and the Anti-Defamation League's book list, which are extremely disrespectful to Palestinians and really hold up all the things that Nora was talking about, erasure and dehumanization. And really, I think the School Library Association needs to think about who it's working with and who it's platforming. And what librarians can do is really very simple. It's just treat Palestine the way you treat every other subject, every other topic. For one thing, you would never put together a book list or a program about Black Lives Matter that did not involve Black people. You wouldn't just say, we've got some other minority here that kind of looks like them, so we're going to do a program with that. But that happens all the time with Palestinians. It'll just be, we found some Muslims that can talk about this. Muslims and Palestinians are not the same thing. So look for Palestinians, and you can find Palestinians. You can work with the Palestine Center for Children's Literature, with Palestine Rights, with librarians and archivists for Palestine. There's so many great organizations that can help you find what actual Palestinians are writing and saying about these issues. You can use the Palestine Book Awards. You can go on to Bookshop and look at the lists that are put up by Interlink Books and by Social Justice Books, who review books by and about Palestine with Palestinian authors that reflect what Palestinians actually think about the situation. But librarians cannot afford to be complacent. We should be proactive. We are information seekers, but our values, our duty is to protect people of all backgrounds who want to see their experience reflected in libraries. People like Iman, people like Jamila. It's not to cave, it's not to be afraid of being criticized or being censored. And frankly, a lot of the time when libraries and librarians do stand up, the censorship goes away. But there's just this fear that you're going to be criticized. And so people immediately give in, and then basically are taking away the right to be represented in the library from people who are taxpayers just like everybody else, and who are also failing to provide the appropriate education to people who want to come into their public library and find out what is going on in Palestine and what Palestinians think. So frankly, if you are a library worker and you are not prepared to do that, you are in the wrong profession.
Yeah, I would also say I appreciate the amount of courage that it takes to stand up in those situations, especially if you've got a family, your job is important to you. Everybody has to assess their own risk. But I will say that even though there is this atmosphere of repression and attacks from the administration, there is also a great public opinion swell of opposition to that. And I do think that when we speak up now and we connect what is happening to other issues that people are upset about, that we will get support.
I would say I slightly disagree, because it is true that there's been an upswell of support for libraries and librarians. But you notice, how many books about Palestine do you see in banned books displays? Every library which has been working to promote support for libraries, to protest against censorship, they never mention Palestine, never. They talk about ICE, they talk about transphobia, they talk about mass incarceration, and those are all important issues, but they are not talking about Palestine. And it is very glaringly obvious that these organizations like PEN, like the ALA, like School Library Journal, like every library, that are supposed to be working on free speech and anti-censorship, they have a huge glaring hole when it comes to Palestine.
Yes.
And I think librarians and information workers need to expose that and need to challenge those organizations.
Absolutely. That's exactly what I'm saying, that it's a good time to do that. And also that as individuals who are not librarians, as patrons of libraries, just as citizens, we need to be speaking up about these things, because there are other people out there who want to hear this and are not really aware of what's going on. Hence the book. But anyway, I also have a question for Abed, and I'm sorry you've only got about 2 minutes for this, but thank you for speaking to epistemicide in Palestine, the ongoing Nakba, and cultural genocide. Could you speak to what moving towards epistemic justice for Palestinians would or could look like in practice, coming from archivists, librarians, and the wider communities of which we're a part? What can we do to support?
Thank
There you
you.
go.
Part of it is to put on front shelves books that talk about Palestine. Part of it is to invite speakers, Palestinian writers, poets, novelists, cultural workers, and practitioners to speak and to organize different conferences and speaking events, celebrate Palestinian memory and historical dates that reflect that Palestinian culture and identity and humanity and beauty and what they brought to this world. In Palestine, we are proud of our diversity. We are proud that this land have hosted cultures through history, and yet people remained hospitable and generous and welcoming and not born with genes of hatred or violence. It is a country and a culture that rejects hatred and violence in that sense. But it's also a country that have defeated invaders through history and will continue to do that however long it takes. So that's why I guess it's important. It's important also for publishers to encourage Palestinian writers to be published and to make tours to advertise for their books and so on. Thank you.
I think we are at 1 o'clock.
Thank you for my co-panelists. Please continue to talk about Palestine.
You bet.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Very moving conversation. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
And Mary
everybody.
and Nora, I'm grateful. I'm so grateful. Thank
We're
you.
grateful for you. We're grateful for you speaking out and being willing to share your experience.
Thank you.
Thank you. And let's celebrate, hopefully, sometime soon, Free Palestine.
That would
Inshallah,
be
ya Rab.
nice.
Ya Rab.
And Abed,
Allah Kareem.
thank you so much for your work. It's absolutely inspiring.
Most welcome. And hopefully see you soon.
That would be nice.
Free
Yes.
Palestine.